At my father-in-law's birthday party, I accidentally spilled wine on him. He punched me in the face, blood hit the floor, and he shouted, "Stupid maid. Go wash my shirt." My husband told me, "Say sorry or leave." So I walked out, but when they got home, I had 68 missed calls. I thought the worst was over when my powerful father-in-law struck me across the face at a glittering family dinner. But that painful, public humiliation was just the beginning. What came next was a desperate, chilling campaign to erase me entirely. Boston in the dead of winter cuts right through you, even with the thickest coat. That night, I stood outside the Corwin mansion, a place that felt more like a grand museum than a home. White stone, massive windows, every light inside blazing like they were daring the world to see how much wealth they truly had. I took a deep breath, adjusted my coat, and forced on that polite smile I'd rehearsed countless times. This wasn't just my husband's family, it was his kingdom, and I was perpetually just a visitor. The moment I stepped inside, the oppressive warmth hit me, along with the hushed hum of classical music and the gentle clinking of crystal. Laughter floated in the air, polite, rehearsed, almost artificial. I recognized some faces, Boston's old money, the people you'd only ever see in society pages or at exclusive charity galas. But they never truly saw me. Their eyes would glance, then slide off me, like I wasn't worth focusing on. For 3 years, I'd mastered the art of making myself invisible in rooms filled with people who thrived on feeling big. My husband, Alaric, was already across the room, standing beside his father, Dorian, like a dutiful soldier. They were so alike, tall, sharp features, that same arrogant confidence that comes from knowing the world bends to your will. He didn't even notice me at first. That was normal. I made polite small talk with a woman whose name I barely knew, nodding along as she rattled on about Aspen ski trips and private chefs. But my mind was already drifting. 3 years. 3 years of biting my tongue, letting every quiet jab, every subtle insult, just roll off my back. 3 years of foolishly convincing myself that if I just tried harder, if I just stayed calm, they'd eventually accept me. Tonight, I swore, it had to be different. It just had to. Dinner was served at the ridiculously long mahogany table in the dining hall. It was the kind of table where no one really ate, everyone just performed. I kept my head down, smiled when I was supposed to, even let out soft laughs at jokes I absolutely didn't find funny. God, I tried. I really, truly tried. Then, it happened. So fast. I was carrying a glass of red wine, trying to pass a plate behind Dorian. My heel caught on the ornate rug. Just a tiny snag, a slip, and the wine splashed across his pristine white shirt. The room went utterly silent. Not the comforting kind, you know? The kind that just strangles you. Dorian turned, slow, his face twisting with pure disgust. And before I could even open my mouth, before I could utter a single apology, his fist connected with my cheek. Hard. I felt the shock first, then the searing pain. Then the sickening gush of warm blood filling my mouth. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my face, the metallic taste of copper spreading across my tongue. "You stupid maid." His voice boomed, rattling the chandeliers, echoing in every corner of that opulent room. "Wash my damn shirt." I couldn't move. I just stood there, reeling, staring at him. 50 people watched, like it was some kind of twisted theater. Some looked away, some actually smirked. But not a single soul said a word. I turned to Alaric, my husband. The man I swore would protect me. Or at least try. He didn't rush to me. He didn't look horrified. He just stood there, his face utterly cold, unreadable. "Apologize to my father," he said, his voice flat, like a gavel striking down a verdict. "Or get out." Something inside me didn't just crack then, it shattered. Not from the physical pain, but from the brutal betrayal. The man I married, the man I thought would choose me, had just picked his father over his wife without a flicker of hesitation. I tasted the blood again, felt it dripping, slow and deliberate, onto the polished marble floor. Suddenly, I couldn't stand to be there another second. There was a silk napkin on the table. I picked it up, wiped my mouth carefully, then straightened my back. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I didn't apologize. I just turned and walked out. Each deliberate step echoed against the marble, a defiant declaration, "I'm done." The cold night air hit me like a physical slap. My car was parked far down the long, sweeping driveway, its windshield already frosted over. I slid inside, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. For a long moment, I just sat there, breathing, tasting blood and pure, raw humiliation. The drive back to my apartment was a blur, snowflakes blurring the windshield, city lights bleeding into a watercolor of pain. My thoughts replayed the scene on an endless loop. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing relentlessly. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my coat on the couch, and finally looked at the screen. 68 missed calls. Alaric, Dorian, back to back, over and over. I didn't answer a single one. But then I opened one of the texts, and my hands went ice cold. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the same spot I always collapsed into after a long day. Except this wasn't just another long day. My apartment suddenly felt impossibly small, its soft light unable to push away the shadows that had crept in with me. The Corwin mansion still clung to me, its glittering judgment, the deep sting of its polished cruelty. This little two-bedroom apartment was supposed to be my safe harbor. But even home can feel like a hostile place when your phone just won't stop screaming at you. I picked up my phone again, even though I'd promised myself I wouldn't. 68 calls, dozens of unread texts. It wasn't just persistence, it was a smothering weight of pressure. I scrolled slowly, each notification a sickening pulse I didn't want to feel. Pick up. Let's talk, Alaric, one of the first. You embarrassed my family, Dorian. Callie, don't make this worse than it already is, Alaric again. You'll regret it if you talk, Dorian. After a while, the words blurred together. Apologies disguised as demands. Warnings dressed as feigned concern. I read them twice, then 3 times, as if understanding their tone could somehow make them less venomous. But it didn't. It never did. Then I saw it. A voicemail. I hadn't noticed it before, tucked away amidst the relentless waves of missed calls. My thumb hovered over it, part of me desperate to delete it, to pretend it didn't exist. But I pressed play. Callie. Dorian's voice, smooth and controlled, just like when he'd intimidate a contractor or a waiter without ever raising his tone. Accidents happen. But if you try to make this into something bigger, I'll make sure you regret it. I have the best lawyers in Boston. Think carefully, Callie. My breath caught. Not because I didn't expect it, but because he didn't even bother hiding it. There it was, laid bare, thinly veiled threats wrapped in fake civility, raw power humming just beneath his words. I stared at the phone in my hand for what felt like an eternity. The old me, the one who'd endured 3 years of dinner table jabs, who bit her tongue through every whispered insult, she would have cried. She would have called Alaric, tried to explain herself, tried to make it right, to shrink even smaller and hope they'd just forget about me. But I didn't do that. Instead, I leaned back against the headboard and let my mind drift somewhere else. To my mother. It had been years since I lost her, but sometimes her voice came back to me like a faint, haunting melody I couldn't unhear. Never let them see you break, she used to say, back when I'd come home from school, tears badly hidden behind a practiced smile. People like that, Callie, they feed on it. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. What would she say if she saw me tonight? If she saw me bleeding on that marble floor while 50 people just watched? Another memory, sharp and cold, clawed its way back, not from tonight, but months ago. A dinner at one of Dorian's favorite upscale restaurants, the kind where you could almost smell the money in the air. I remembered the candlelight glinting off his cufflinks as he sat across from me, watching like a hawk, while Alaric slid a folded document across the table. Just legal housekeeping, Alaric had murmured, his voice too casual, like he was asking me to sign for a package. What is this? I'd asked, utterly confused. A prenuptial amendment, he'd explained. Nothing major, just clarifying some things. It's for everyone's protection. Everyone. He meant his family. Not me. I'd felt the crushing weight of Dorian's gaze, his unspoken smirk saying everything. I wasn't his daughter-in-law, I was an outsider, being starkly reminded of my place. And I signed it. God, I hated remembering that. Hated knowing how thoroughly I'd diminished myself. How utterly desperate I'd been to keep Alaric from slipping away. I'd truly believed that compliance would buy me safety. I'd foolishly thought playing along would make me a part of them. All it did was hand them the very tools to destroy me. The anger hit me then, sharp and clean and exhilarating. I pushed myself up and walked to the small desk by the window. It was cluttered, old bills, unopened mail, a half-burnt candle. But hidden beneath a stack of takeout menus was a notebook. I hadn't touched it in a long, long time. It had started as a diary, but somewhere along the way, it had transformed into something else entirely, a ledger. A meticulous record of every slight, every insult Dorian had ever thrown my way. At first, I hadn't even known why I kept it. Maybe for my sanity, maybe because some part of me, deep down, knew this day would eventually come. I flipped through the pages slowly, dinner comments, venomous phone calls, the time he joked about having me sign a prenup after we were already married. My handwriting was shaky at first, then sharper, more deliberate. This wasn't just therapy anymore. This was evidence. The phone buzzed again on the bed. I didn't move to get it. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the silk napkin I'd taken from the party. It was still stained, a deep, ugly red against the pale fabric. I held it in my hands for a long time. A stupid piece of cloth, but it felt like a turning point, a stark reminder that I couldn't keep being the woman who swallowed her pain in silence. This ends soon, I whispered to no one. The words were barely audible, but real enough to make my chest tighten with a strange resolve. I turned off my phone. No more buzzing, no more voices, just silence. But it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm. And I had no idea just how far they'd truly go to keep me quiet. When I found out, something inside me finally snapped. Morning light crept through the blinds, thin and pale, almost reluctant to wake me. Not that I'd truly slept. I'd spent hours staring at the ceiling, listening to the city slowly stir outside my window, the faint hum of delivery trucks, distant voices. The world, it seemed, just kept moving on as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't been bleeding on polished marble floors while a room full of people watched like it was pure entertainment. My phone buzzed again on the nightstand. I didn't even look. The relentless rhythm of those vibrations had become its own special kind of torture. Alaric's name, sometimes Dorian's. I didn't need to see the words to know the tone. I'd heard it all before. Instead, I just got up. My body felt heavy, alien, like it belonged to someone else, but I pushed myself anyway. In the kitchen, I poured yesterday's stale coffee into a mug and heated it in the microwave. The silence in my apartment felt safer than their voices, but it was a fragile safety, skin deep. I opened my laptop, more out of habit than purpose. I just wanted to distract myself, maybe catch up on work, bury myself in anything that didn't involve the Corwins. But the first thing I saw wasn't my inbox. It was an email. Per Mr. Corwin, your silence is expected. Any attempt to escalate this incident will result in consequences for you and your marriage. It was from his assistant. Not even him. He didn't need to get his own hands dirty when someone else could do it for him. I stared at that email for a long, long time, reading it over and over, desperately hoping it would change, that the words would soften. But they didn't. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just about what he'd done at that party anymore. It was about absolute control. Keeping me in my place. Making sure I stayed quiet, invisible, compliant. And Alaric? He knew. He had to. I thought of him, standing there, stone-faced, while his father called me a stupid maid. He told me to apologize. Apologize? Like I was the one who'd crossed some unforgivable line. Like my blood on their floor was nothing more than a minor inconvenience to him. My hands trembled on the keyboard, but not from fear. Not entirely. It was something deeper, something that had been building inside me for a very long time. I closed my eyes, and that chilling memory from the prenup conversation came back, uninvited. A dinner months ago, at one of Dorian's ultra-exclusive restaurants, the kind where you could practically smell the money in the air. I remembered the candlelight reflecting off Dorian's cufflinks as he sat across from me, watching like a predator, while Alaric slid that folded document across the table. Just legal housekeeping, Alaric had murmured, his voice too casual, like he was asking me to sign for a package. What is this? I'd asked, utterly confused. A prenuptial amendment, he'd explained. Nothing major, just clarifying some things. It's for everyone's protection. Everyone. He meant his family. Not me. I'd felt the oppressive weight of Dorian's gaze, his unspoken smirk saying everything. I wasn't his daughter-in-law, I was an outsider, being starkly reminded of my place. And I signed it. God, I hated remembering that. Hated knowing how thoroughly I'd diminished myself. How utterly desperate I'd been to keep Alaric from slipping away. I'd truly believed that compliance would buy me safety. I'd foolishly thought playing along would make me a part of them. All it did was hand them the very tools to destroy me. The anger hit me then, sharp and clean and exhilarating. I walked back to my desk, the same one where I'd found the notebook last night. I pulled it out again, flipping past the messy entries of insults and countless dinners gone wrong. This time, I turned to a fresh, blank page. Document everything, I wrote at the top. My handwriting was steady now, each letter deliberate. Names, dates, exact words. It felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself, piece by piece. Then, I reached for the small side drawer on the desk. Inside, tucked away under years of forgotten receipts, was a small USB drive. I'd labeled it in case. It was a habit from my old life, long before the Corwins. A small, hidden way to protect myself when the ground beneath me felt like it might crumble. I held it in my palm for a long time, feeling its surprising weight. If they wanted silence, they had, without a doubt, picked the wrong woman. But first, there was one more person I needed to confront. The one person I thought I could still trust. It took me nearly an hour to draft that text. Every version I wrote sounded either too angry or too desperately needy. But eventually, I sent it, meet me. No Dorian, no excuses. His reply came almost immediately. Too quickly, really. Where? That one word told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't coming to apologize. He was coming to control the narrative. I chose a quiet coffee shop in Cambridge, neutral ground. Somewhere he couldn't raise his voice without drawing a scene. When I walked in, the comforting scent of roasted beans and old wood hit me. It was quiet for a Saturday morning, the kind of place where people came to work in hushed silence, laptops glowing between half-drunk cappuccinos. I picked a table by the window and sat, back straight, my fingers tightly wrapped around a mug I hadn't touched. He walked in 10 minutes later, still in one of his tailored suits, though his tie was loose, like that was supposed to make him more approachable. For a fleeting second, I almost forgot why we were there. Almost. Callie, he said, as if it were some kind of olive branch. Alaric, I responded, offering no smile, not even standing. He sat across from me, folding his hands on the table like a man preparing for a cross-examination. It hit me then, with startling clarity. He wasn't here as my husband. He was here as Dorian Corwin's son. Let's talk, he said. I leaned forward, my voice barely a whisper, yet vibrating with controlled fury. Why didn't you do anything? He hit me, Alaric. In front of everyone. And you just stood there. His gaze darted away, to the table, to the window, anywhere but me. It was an accident, he mumbled. He was drunk. You know how my dad gets when he drinks. Something inside me didn't just splinter, it exploded. An accident? Are you kidding me? He called me a stupid maid, Alaric. That wasn't just his hand. That was everything he thinks of me, condensed into one brutal moment. He sighed, as if I was being difficult. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. If I just what? My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't have cared less. If I just smile and pretend it didn't happen? If I just let your father humiliate me whenever he wants? That got his attention. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw it. Not guilt. Not remorse. Just fear. You don't understand, he said, his voice low, almost desperate. My dad controls everything. The trust. The business. Even parts of my career. If you push him, we both lose everything. The words echoed in my head. We both lose everything. That was what this was truly about, wasn't it? Not my dignity. Not my safety. His career. His money. His father's approval. Would you let anyone hit your sister and get away with it? I asked, my voice trembling now, but not from fear, from pure, unadulterated rage. Why is it different for me? Why am I the one who always has to bend? He rubbed his temples, visibly agitated. Because this isn't just about you, Callie. This is about keeping the peace. I laughed then, a bitter, hollow sound that I barely recognized as my own. Keeping the peace? You mean keeping your father happy, don't you? His expression hardened. If you love me, you'll make peace with him. Apologize and we can move forward. Apologize. For a moment, I literally couldn't breathe. It was like all the air had been sucked out of that small room. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back sharply. That was it. The last cord between us snapped. Quietly. But definitively. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor in the otherwise hushed cafe. He started to say my name again, but I didn't let him finish. If staying married to you means surrendering to him, I said, my voice steady, clear. Then I'll lose everything before I lose myself. I walked out without a single look back, the biting winter air burning my face as I stepped outside. And that was the precise moment I decided, if Alaric wouldn't fight for me, I would fight for myself. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies. And I knew exactly where to find them. By the time I made it back to my apartment, the winter sky had settled into that hollow, bruised gray that always seems to hang over Boston. The air inside smelled faintly of stale coffee and a crushing loneliness. I dropped my bag by the door and sank onto the edge of my couch, staring at the blinking light on my phone. More messages, more voicemails, endless chains of notifications. I couldn't bring myself to press play. I just leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the silence swallow me whole. But it wasn't silent. Not really. It was filled with echoes. Don't let anyone convince you silence is the same as peace. My mother's voice. So soft, but unshakable. It came back to me like she was sitting right there beside me. I could almost see her, apron dusted with flour, strands of hair falling out of their pins. She used to say that when I came home from school with red eyes and clenched fists, too unwilling to tell her what had happened. Silence doesn't protect you, Callie, she'd tell me. It just keeps you invisible. For a moment, I actually wanted to believe she was wrong. That if I just kept my head down, if I swallowed it all like I had for years, it would eventually get easier. But then my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Alaric or Dorian. It was a message from an old friend, one of the very few people who still dared to keep in touch after I'd married into the Corwins. Be careful, the text read. I heard Dorian's prepping a defamation suit. He wants to scare you into staying quiet. I read it 3 times before the full, horrifying weight of it sank in. They weren't just trying to humiliate me anymore. They wanted to erase me. Something inside me finally broke then. Not in a shattering, destructive way, but in a way that finally, brutally woke me up. I slid off the couch and onto the floor, hugging my knees, letting the tears come. Not just for the party, not just for the sting of Dorian's fist or Alaric's cold, hollow gaze. No, these tears were for every dinner where my voice had been drowned out by their polished laughter. For every single time I'd convinced myself that enduring their contempt was somehow keeping the peace. I don't know how long I stayed like that. The room grew darker, the city outside quieter, until the only sound was my own uneven, ragged breathing. When I finally stood, my body felt heavy, as if I'd been carrying the Corwin name, their entire oppressive weight, on my back for years without even realizing it. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for. Maybe just help. Maybe a sign. My fingers moved almost on their own, searching for legal aid, typing out words like free consultation and domestic abuse legal resources. That's when I found it. A community legal clinic right in the heart of Boston. Evening hours. Walk-ins welcome. I hesitated. I was still in yesterday's clothes, my hair a mess, my makeup smudged from tears I hadn't even bothered to wipe away. But what else was I going to do? Sit here and wait for Dorian to bury me? I grabbed my coat and left. The clinic wasn't glamorous at all. It was tucked between a laundromat and a discount shoe store, the kind of place you'd probably pass 100 times without ever noticing. Inside, it smelled of old paper and worn carpet, with posters about tenants' rights peeling slightly at the edges. I almost turned right around. But then a voice called out, "Can I help you?" She was older, maybe late 60s, with sharp, perceptive eyes that seemed to notice absolutely everything, and a voice that carried the kind of authority you don't earn from a title, but from simply surviving life itself. I need advice, I stammered, my voice barely more than a whisper. Sit, she said simply, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her name was Marjorie, a retired attorney who now volunteered at the clinic. I told her everything. Or at least, as much as I could manage without completely falling apart again. She didn't interrupt. She didn't give me those pitying looks I'd grown so used to. She just listened. When I finally stopped talking, she leaned back, folded her hands, and said, "You're not crazy, Callie. You're in a system designed to break you. But I've seen men like Dorian fall before." Her words cut through me, not like a knife, but like pure, blinding light. I didn't know if I truly believed her, but for the first time since that night at the mansion, I felt something other than absolute despair. I left the clinic with Marjorie's card in my pocket and her words echoing in my head. I've seen men like Dorian fall before. If that was true, then I was going to make damn sure Dorian Corwin was next. The next morning felt different. Not lighter, no. The immense weight was still there, but it was the kind you finally decide to lift on purpose. I woke up with a plan already forming in my mind. One shaky, but undeniably real step at a time. I actually made myself breakfast, a real meal, not the stale crackers I'd been barely surviving on. 2 scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee that wasn't reheated from the day before. It wasn't much, but it felt like reclaiming a tiny piece of myself. By mid-morning, I was back at the legal clinic. Marjorie was already there, sifting through papers behind her desk like a woman who genuinely hadn't retired. She looked up when I walked in, her sharp eyes softening for just a second before snapping back to their usual steel. "You came back," she said, as if she'd been expecting me all along. "I can't do this alone," I admitted, sliding into the chair across from her. "No one can," she replied simply. "Let's talk options." We spent the next hour going over exactly what needed to be done. Filing for a restraining order, meticulously documenting every single incident of abuse, even the ones I'd tried to convince myself weren't bad enough to matter. She kept telling me, patterns matter more than single events, Callie. You've been in a system of control. The more we can prove it, the harder it is for him to spin this. Then she leaned back, crossed her arms, and said something that utterly caught me off guard. "You should know, this isn't my first time dealing with Dorian Corwin." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Years ago," she explained, "I represented one of his employees. A man who stood up to him after being harassed at work. Dorian blacklisted him, utterly ruined his career. We lost the case because Dorian buried us in legal maneuvering, but..." She tapped her desk, a small, knowing smirk playing on her lips. "I still have the documentation. Old records, letters, evidence of exactly how far he'll go when he thinks someone's a threat." My pulse quickened. "You kept it?" Marjorie just nodded. "I don't throw away things that might be useful later. And Dorian Corwin always leaves a trail." For the very first time, it felt like we weren't just playing defense. We were building something. After leaving the clinic, I headed straight to the public library. I honestly didn't know what I expected to find, maybe nothing. But sitting in that quiet space, surrounded by the soft hum of computers and the comforting smell of old paper, I felt a strange calm. Like I belonged somewhere again. I dug through public records, combing through years of business filings, charity reports, property ownership records. It was tedious, mind-numbingly so, but then I saw it. A property transfer made under Dorian's name just days before the party. A luxury condo in Beacon Hill, moved into a trust with no clear beneficiary. It screamed attempt to hide assets. I took out my phone and photographed everything. As I was gathering my things, my phone buzzed. "Alaric," the text read. "Stop this madness before you ruin us all." I stared at it for a long moment. A week ago, that text would have absolutely gutted me. Today? It made me laugh. A short, cold, humorless sound. I wasn't afraid of his warnings anymore. That night, I sat with Marjorie again in her office. We spread out everything on the table, her old files, my new photos, a growing, damning list of dates, names, and connections. "When you fight someone like Dorian," she said, sliding her glasses down to meet my eyes, "you don't aim to win the first round. You aim to end the war." Her words echoed in my head long after I left. For the first time since all of this began, I felt the ground truly shift beneath me. Not because I was falling, but because I'd planted my feet. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was building something bigger. A case. A weapon. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't the prey. I was the hunter. But I didn't realize Dorian had already set his final, brutal trap for me. The pounding on my door came before sunrise, jarring me awake. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, maybe a wrong delivery, but when I opened it, a man in a heavy overcoat stood there, an official-looking envelope in hand. His voice was clipped, practiced. "Are you Callie Corwin?" The way he said my married name made my stomach twist. "Yes," I managed. "You've been served." He pressed the thick envelope into my hands, turned, and walked away before I could even process what was happening. I stood there in the doorway, barefoot, the cold air from the hall seeping in, staring at those papers as if they might burn me. Defamation, restraining order. My knees nearly gave out. I stumbled to the couch and flipped through page after page of dense legal jargon. The words didn't feel real. Unstable, vindictive, posing a threat to the Corwin family's reputation. They had painted me as a deranged stranger, not a wife, not a daughter-in-law, certainly not a human being. The restraining order was even worse. I wasn't allowed near Dorian, not at any family properties, and definitely not at any Corwin-related events. They had tried to carve me out of their family like I was just a stain they could scrub off. My fingers shook as I grabbed my phone and dialed Alaric. He answered after the second ring, his voice flat, emotionless. "You brought this on yourself," he said, before I could even speak. "He warned you, Callie. I told you to let this go." "Alaric," my voice broke, but not from tears, from pure disbelief. "Your father hit me. He humiliated me in front of everyone. And now he's trying to destroy me in court. And you? You're fine with this?" There was a pause, then that same quiet, clipped tone. I can't get between you and my father. You've made your choices. Now live with them. He hung up. I stared at the phone, as if it might explain how the man I married could suddenly sound so much like a stranger. The papers blurred as I tried to reread them. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a vicious character assassination. They'd gone straight for my credibility, my sanity, my entire sense of self. It felt like every whispered insult I'd endured at their dinner table, every patronizing glance, had been twisted and turned into evidence. Emotional instability, disruptive behavior, vindictive personality. I wanted to rip it all up. I wanted to scream until my throat was raw. But instead, I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Marjorie's. She didn't need me to explain. One look at me clutching those papers, and she ushered me into her office, her sharp eyes blazing with an almost predatory glint. Let me guess, she said, flipping through the stack. They're trying to make you look like the problem. They're saying I'm unstable, that I'm out for revenge, that I stopped, the words sticking in my throat, choking me. Marjorie's mouth pressed into a thin line as she reached for a folder on her desk. Callie, I need you to brace yourself. I pulled some strings and found out how they're backing this up. I nodded, though I already felt the crushing weight of what was coming. They bribed one of his former housekeepers, she said, her voice grim. Paid her to testify that you've had violent outbursts, that you've threatened Dorian before. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The room tilted, and I had to grip the edge of the chair just to ground myself. They're building a case to make you look dangerous, Marjorie said softly. It's ugly, but this is what men like Dorian do when they're scared. I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. So, he gets to hit me, destroy my name, and walk away like the victim? Marjorie leaned forward, her gaze intense. That's what he thinks. But Callie, listen to me, people like him don't do this unless they feel threatened. You're getting to him. That means you keep going. Her words should have comforted me, but I felt utterly hollow. The idea of standing in a courtroom while they dragged my name through the mud, twisted my very identity, made me want to simply disappear. For one wild, desperate moment, I considered packing a bag, leaving Boston, and never looking back. No one would blame me for running. No one would even notice I was gone. But then I caught my reflection in Marjorie's office window. Tired, battered, yes, but still there. Still me. If they're willing to bury me like this, I said quietly, the realization settling in my bones, then they know I can hurt them. Marjorie gave a small, fierce nod. Exactly. And now we show them they picked the wrong woman. I walked out of that office, my hands still trembling. But for the first time that day, it wasn't from fear. It was from something else entirely. They wanted to bury me. Instead, they'd simply lit the fuse. And I was ready to burn everything they thought was untouchable. It started in Marjorie's office, about a week before Christmas. Her space was as gloriously cluttered as ever, files stacked high, half-drunk mugs of tea abandoned across her desk. I handed her the thick folder of documents I'd been compiling for weeks, bank records, fraudulent property transfers, internal correspondence that should have stayed private but hadn't. She flipped through them silently, the faint, knowing smile on her lips betraying her thoughts. This, she finally said, tapping a particular document, is going to set him on fire. Are you ready for that, Callie? Because once we do this, there's no going back. I'd been asked that question before, by myself, in the suffocating quiet of my apartment, every single night since Dorian served me those papers. And every time, my answer had grown clearer. There's nothing left to go back to, I told her. Marjorie's eyes softened for just a moment. Then, with a fierce glint, she said, then let's scorch the earth. We mapped it out carefully. No impulsive moves, no emotional outbursts. I had one shot, one precision strike, to hit him where it truly hurt, his image. Dorian lived and breathed for his reputation in Boston's elite circles. Destroying that would be the one wound he couldn't just stitch up with money. I spent 2 sleepless nights drafting anonymous emails to every investigative journalist I could find. Each email contained the files, the undeniable proof of his fraudulent property transfers, whispers of money laundering hidden under layers of corporate jargon. I scheduled them to go live at exactly 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve, during his highly publicized charity gala. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. He'd planned a night of polished speeches and cameras catching him playing the benevolent tycoon. Instead, I'd turn it into the night his carefully constructed empire finally cracked, right there in front of everyone who truly mattered to him. On the evening of the gala, I stood in front of my mirror for longer than I'd care to admit. I chose a simple black dress, nothing flashy, but sharp enough to demand attention. This wasn't about beauty anymore. It was about reclaiming the dignity they'd stripped from me. The ballroom was everything I expected: glittering chandeliers, white draped tables, the cloying scent of immense wealth and old money perfuming the air. I hadn't been invited, of course, but no one stopped me. The Corwins had always been masters of polite pretense. Alaric found me before I even reached the center of the room. He looked paler than I'd ever seen him. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, grabbing my arm. I pulled away calmly, watching the show unfolding around us, his jaw clenched tight. "Callie, this isn't the way." "It's the only way," I told him. I didn't wait for his response. Across the room, Dorian stood at the podium, radiating smug confidence as he thanked donors for helping the less fortunate. His voice boomed over the microphone, and I wondered if anyone else could hear the rot beneath those perfectly chosen words. Then it happened. Precisely at 8:03 p.m., his phone lit up. Then another. And another. He glanced at the screen, his expression flickering, that carefully maintained mask slipping just slightly. Around the room, other phones began buzzing as the news broke. Real estate mogul Dorian Corwin under federal investigation for fraud and property laundering. The room erupted. Whispers spread like wildfire, heads turned, fingers pointed. Dorian's face flushed a deep crimson as he fumbled through his speech. "This is slander. An attack on my family's good name." That was when the agents walked in. Federal agents. Calm, authoritative, with official papers in hand. They served him a subpoena right there, under the crystal glow of his painstakingly crafted empire. Cameras flashed. Someone, somewhere, filmed as Dorian's voice cracked into a furious, guttural outburst, exactly the image of the powerful man unraveling that I wanted the world to see. I didn't stay to watch the full collapse. I didn't need to. As I walked out, Alaric called my name again, but I kept going. For once, I didn't feel small or silenced or invisible. For the first time in years, Dorian Corwin wasn't untouchable. And I wasn't invisible. But when the dust finally settled, I had to face the quiet reality of what I'd lost, and what, against all odds, I'd truly gained. My new apartment was small, just a one-bedroom on the 8th floor, overlooking the quiet expanse of Boston Harbor. From my window, I could see ferries crawling across the gray water, gulls swooping low like they owned the place. It was quiet here. Too quiet at first, the kind of silence that forces you to notice every single thing that's missing. For weeks, I'd been running purely on adrenaline. Now, there was just stillness. I sat on the edge of my bed that morning, barefoot, staring at the boxes I still hadn't unpacked. My entire life, reduced to cardboard and tape. My phone was on the nightstand, its screen flickering with notifications that I simply ignored. There was a time, not long ago, I would have snatched it up immediately, bracing myself for Dorian's next move, for Alaric's clipped, demanding texts, for whatever new storm they'd decided to unleash. But now? I just let it buzz. They weren't my storms anymore. Later that day, I met Marjorie at her office for what she called the final wrap-up. She was in remarkably good spirits, which usually meant she had news worth hearing. She didn't waste time. "Dorian's empire is in freefall," she said, handing me a printed report. Fraud charges, property seizures, investigations piling up faster than his lawyers can spin them. The restraining order? Officially dismissed as of this morning. He's done, Callie. Done. The word done felt heavier than I expected. I thought I'd feel triumphant, ecstatic. But all I felt was tired. Marjorie leaned back in her chair, studying me with those sharp, knowing eyes. "You know," she said softly, "it's okay to grieve, even when you've won." I nodded. She was right. I'd burnt down the house that held me hostage, yes, but I'd lived in it for years. My scars wouldn't just vanish simply because his walls had crumbled. "Thank you," I told her, my voice catching more than I wanted it to. "For helping me find my voice when I thought I didn't have one anymore." Her expression softened, a rare, gentle smile on her lips. "You found it yourself, Callie. I just reminded you how loud it could be." 2 days later, Alaric asked to meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We chose a quiet cafe tucked into a forgotten corner of Cambridge, the kind of place where no one would care who we were. He was already there when I arrived, hands clasped, staring into a cup of coffee that had probably gone stone cold. He looked smaller somehow, like the immense weight of his family's disgrace had finally settled on his shoulders. "Callie," he said as I sat down. "I'm sorry." I let the words hang there, waiting. "I was scared," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Scared of losing everything. My career. My family. I convinced myself staying silent was protecting us. I see now how wrong that was. Part of me, a deep, aching part, still wanted to believe him. Still ached for the man I thought he was. But then I remembered that night in the ballroom. The taste of blood on my lip. His voice, cold and flat, telling me to apologize to the man who hit me. He reached for my hand. Can we rebuild? Start over? I pulled back gently, shaking my head. I'm done rebuilding things that were never safe for me in the first place. His face crumpled, but I didn't stay to comfort him. I stood, left a few dollars on the table, and walked out. On my way home, I stopped by the harbor. The wind was sharp, cutting right through my coat. But I stayed there for a long time, watching the dark, churning water. I remembered how small I once felt in Dorian's world. How hard I tried to contort myself to fit into a space that was never, ever meant for me. I don't need that world anymore. That night, back in my quiet apartment, I sent Marjorie a single text. Thank you for helping me burn it all down. Now I can finally build something new. I set the phone down, curled up by the window, and breathed in the cool salt air. The ashes of their empire weren't my burden anymore. They were my freedom. And that, my friends, is how I finally found my voice.